Hey, what's up, everybody? Frederick Polk here. So there's this new justification that's going around in MAGA and Trump world where they're trying to claim that, well, back in the 90s, sleeping with a 14-year-old girl wasn't that gross. It wasn't considered taboo. And that's the way they're going to justify Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump's behavior when, he ran Miss Teen USA and all this other horrible stuff that's probably in there. But as someone who was a young man in the 90s, I was 13 years old when 1990 hit. So I was 18 and an adult and in the Marine Reserves in 1995. And I pretty much I partied and I went out as much as I could pretty much until about 2000. So this is going to be my perspective as a man about town then, and why this notion of, it was okay back then, was not okay back then, and these dudes are pedophiles and they're gross. But before I get into it, if you like my content and you like what I do, please consider supporting me by hitting that like button and subscribing to my channel. Anyway, let's go. So, like a lot of young men, in East Tennessee, I was kind of shy, and I didn't really start dating until I got a car. Now, a lot of girls started dating before us because, once we got to high school, they were freshmen, seniors would take them out, and that really just wasn't the norm at all for the guys. There might be one guy that was dating a senior girl, but I'll be damned if I could remember who it was. So really, you couldn't date as a guy other than just meeting up with a girl at the mall, maybe in 8th grade, and walk around, maybe go to a movie and do a little heavy petting, if you didn't have a car, right? So, at about 16 years old, I remember this is like a second or third date I went on, and I was dating a young woman, and I was all kinds of nervous. I think I even dressed up for it, wore some cheap cologne that I'd bought at a pharmacy, and just you name it, it was all kinds of awkward. And I remember talking to her, and somehow, the topic of sex came up. I absolutely didn't bring it up. But she kind of floored me because she said, oh, yeah, I had my first sex, when I was 14, and I've had a bunch of sex since then. And I was just kind of stunned because that wasn't even close to my experience, right? And, I remember being curious about it and probably asked her too many pointed questions because we didn't go out after that. But also, it just kind of portrayed how naive and inexperienced I was to her. But that was kind of my first encounter with a young girl that had way more, sexual experience than me, and she never told me who it was, and I'd often wondered who it was. But, again, in East Tennessee, it wasn't uncommon for somebody in their 20s to date 14, 15, 16. It wasn't the norm, but it happened more often than you thought about. And a lot of times they might marry them young, and you'd see women that had, kids, 2 or 3 kids by the time they were 21. And yeah, that's how it was. Still kind of creepy, still kind of weird, but it was just okay, it happened. Went through high school, had a couple girlfriends, still kind of shy, spent a lot of my time mostly just playing D&D and, really just, being just super awkward. But that all changed after I got out of Marine boot camp and went to college. It's like someone threw a switch to where instead of being shy and sort of picky about, which woman I was attracted to, I was suddenly attracted to damn near every woman. And I just wanted to get laid all the time. I wanted to have sex with as many women as I could. I wanted to have sex all the time. It didn't matter. Like, I don't know what it was. I've always wondered if it was supposedly the saltpeter that they put in the food, that the rumor that's how they keep the guys from being super horny, other than just you're kind of terrified and worn out most of the time. And, so there's no women around, so unless you're gay, you don't really even think about sex. There was WMs at boot camp that we saw that, the saltpeter didn't work. Let's just put it that way. And so going to college, I didn't do well my first year, kind of dropped out, started going off and on in community college. But I would do odd jobs here and there, like I delivered pizzas for a little while, or, I would do I'd bounce at nightclubs, or, I'd go help, on a job here and there, getting scrap metal, stuff like that, just whatever, But one of my buddies from high school ended up befriending a guy. So this would be about, I'm about 20 years old. So this is 97. And he was into the internet, computers, right? He built websites, back when that was still extremely new. I didn't really even start using email until college in 1995. And so he would, he had an apartment in town in Johnson City, and he would travel all over the place. And he got paid really good money. So when he was in town, he'd want to go out and he'd want to party, and he would spend it. It was, we were all in our 20s, and I think he was 29, so he was older than us. But he bought just a whole bunch of toys, a Sea-Doo and then a truck and this and that. So it's he was always hey, come on out, I'll buy drinks, blah, 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 right? And he was a great guy too. So it's yeah, man, we roll out. And of course, I'm 20 years old, so I can't legally buy drinks. So I'm all about it. Heck yeah, dude. Let's do it. The thing was, when you go out, it didn't matter even was back then, small town, medium town, big town. You start flashing money around, you attract, especially in a nightclub, you attract women, and you attract angry ass dudes. So it ended up usually falling to me and my buddy, we were both Marine reservists. We would put those angry ass dudes in their place. Sometimes that was just a harsh word and a glare. Other times it was, a forearm to their chest, and we got down. We got after it. What they say, a little tussling, if you will. And so, yeah, he didn't mind having us around. Now, the funny thing was, back then, whenever we would go out, I would go out. It didn't matter. I was going out 5-6 nights a week. There was no internet. There was, and video games were cool, but, heck, this was better than anything, right? There was always something to get into. There's always women to holler at. There was always, maybe a fight might break out. We didn't go looking for trouble, but trouble was going to find us. And if you go out long enough, and especially if you help the bouncers in a nightclub, you're going to, funnily enough, you don't pay for things anymore. At least where I was, right? You don't pay for drinks. You don't pay for, entry. So I was getting into the nightclubs for free, right? Not the strip clubs, because you got to pay the women, and I'll get in. That's another time for when I used to work security in there and would hang out in there, but I won't get into that. So, but even with that, going out 6 nights a week, hitting on a bunch of women, being around money and being a good time and around liquor, right? Partying our ass off. You still don't, right? You don't get every single woman. You don't you hit on, right? You don't hook up every night. In fact, I looked at the stats once and I said, man, if I was a Major League Baseball player, I'd be sent to the minors, It's just how it was. Now, the thing that we noticed, because we went out a lot, there were always these older guys that would come into the club. It was the old guy in the club. And they were kind of trying to do the same thing we were doing, right? Except we really just knew if we kind of bought drinks and we were raucous, like women would just flock to us because we were their age and, you know, we apparently had money and it was what it was. But these guys would kind of try, these were your low rent Trumps and Epstein types, right? They would hit on the young women. They were trying to buy them drinks. They were trying to, you know, basically hook up in the same way we were. But it always seemed kind of cringe and gross, right? It was just like, damn, they're still in here doing that? Or, man, like, what is, the girls are clearly just using them for drinks, right? But every once in a while, the line would work, or, you know, and they'd leave with somebody, and there it was. Now, my little set, we didn't mess with young girls, but that didn't mean they didn't come around us, right? And so there were 2 instances that happened where I almost crossed this line, and this is how I know it's gross. So I was about 20 years old. I'd been out of college for about a year and a half. About 2 years, somewhere around there. And I had some buddies that I'd played with that were now seniors when I was a jock in high school. I played basketball. But I knew a lot of guys on the football team, and they were getting ready to play. And so, you know, we kind of made it a habit, like for 2, let's go to homecoming, man. Let's hire the fellas. You know, let's catch up with folks. And we would go. So we went to the high school. It was homecoming. And the funny thing was, like, the people that were really, really cool with you were really cool. But a lot of the other guys were very standoffish. They're like, hey, what's going on? Kind of like, what are you doing here? And a lot of that I got because we were kind of like that in high school, because these older guys would come in and they hit on the young girls in high school and yada, yada, yada. You know, so we go to a football game, and we were playing another school, right? One that we rarely played at that time. And it just happened to be in our homecoming. And I ended up chatting up this chick from the other school, right? And she was she was pretty good size for a woman. I'm 6'5", and I was 6'5" absolutely at that point. She was about, I'd say 5'8", 5'9". You know, she came right up to my shoulder and she absolutely looked every bit of a senior, 18, you know, like the genes were good for her. Let me just put it that way. You know, her genetics, you know, well endowed, stacked in all the right places. And so I ended up getting her number. Now, this is back in the day when everybody had a landline, right? But throughout that conversation, like, because she was wearing a Letterman's jacket, so I figured her boyfriend was playing sports, but I didn't care about him. He was in another school. Like, you know, fuck that dude, right? So she gave me her number. And I call her up. Now, I forgot to ask her age, right? I assumed she was a senior. And either 17, which at that time I think for me was legal. It was close, right? Or 18, you know, as a senior. So I was like, okay, you know, why not get a little young thing that still in school, ain't got to bother with it too much, you know, romance her a little bit. She goes off to college and I'm free of her. At least that's what my 20-something mind was thinking at that time. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just telling you what it was. So I call her on the phone and I start talking to her. Come to find out, she was actually a sophomore and she was 15. And I remember this panic starting to rise up in me as soon as she let that out. And I kind of felt like it was a voice just telling me, yo, what in the hell are you doing, bro? Like, no. Now, again, we knew people, right, that Husband was 27, wife was 17, ended up getting married at 18, had kids, 3 of them by 21, 22. It wasn't common, but it wasn't uncommon, right? And I remember I thought back to an incident with a buddy of mine that happened in high school. So I'll back up a little bit. I was a junior, he was a senior. And my junior year, like I was, at then I just wanted to play video games and lift weights and, hopefully, oh gosh, it would be so great to get a girlfriend, right? And so, after practice or whatever, I go to over to my man's house. We'd lift weights for about an hour. And then we'd play Contra, and then I'd go home for dinner, right? He was 18 as a senior, and he ended up dating a sophomore who was a girl who he started dating her when she was 15 and she turned 16. And let's say he was the first man over the wall with this girl, right? And they had sex subsequently after that. Somehow, I think it was she felt guilty about it, and she told her mother, and her parents freaked the hell out. Like, exploded. And they threatened to call the law on my man. They threatened to, throw him in jail and try to get him as a, sex offender and all this stuff, right? Because he was 18, And his dad had to go talk to her dad and straighten it out, right? Cooler heads eventually prevailed. Now, he broke up with her after that because it was like, I ain't, no. And that was that. So that was entering in my mind when I'm talking to this girl. And I remember her saying to me, she's like, yeah, I'm gonna have to tell my parents, I'm gonna go do this and you'll have to meet me here and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh no, I ain't doing that. I'm not gonna do that. So I told her straight on that phone call, I was like, no, I can't do this. I thought she was older. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I shouldn't be talking to you. She's like, what? I said, nah, girl, I shouldn't be talking to you. I gotta go. I was like, I'll see you later. Click. That was one time where I kind of inadvertently walked up to the line. The next time I walked up to the line and decided not to jump in the pool, right? Going back to us going out, having the club life, all that stuff, right? It was about 6 months into it, and we'd had a routine, and so my buddy at the time was working in one of them stores in the mall, right? And he had this young woman that was working with him. She's about 19, and this chick was an absolute smoke show. I mean, just drop dead gorgeous, right? And she hung out with us, Now, everybody and their mama in our group was trying to get with this girl, but me. I'm like, I was just like, nah, I ain't trying to get in line. It's going to be just like a cock block fest and everybody's peacocking and I ain't trying to do all that. But there was this younger girl getting ready to be a woman that came around with her and would go out to the clubs with us because we got in, and if they were with us, they didn't get carded, right? And she was a senior in high school, and she's about 17, about 6 months shy of 18, right? And again, girl was stacked in all the right places. Like, her driver's license may have said teenage, but her body was not teenage. She was 17 going on 27, And she was really smart too. And the one thing I noticed, like, we go out, she would drink, but she wouldn't get like drunk. Her friend who was 19 would get hammered and then would be a mess. And really that's what that girl was there for, was to be the one that would, she'd have a couple drinks and then, she would basically babysit her friend. And so I ended up chatting her up, the 17-year-old chick, And I liked her because, again, real smart. We had some things in common, you know. And then one day she said, why don't we hang out sometime? Now I'm about 21, getting ready to be 22 at this time. And I was like, yeah, okay, let's do it. Let's meet up. We'll have dinner and we'll do our thing, Now, again, according to Tennessee state law at the time, I was good to go, right? And in the club atmosphere, right, absolutely acted like most young women who were 20, 22, around my age. You couldn't tell the difference. In fact, in a lot of ways, she was more mature, okay? And at this point, I had hooked up with women that were 26, 27, 28. I think one woman, like, who I had a regular thing with was 32, 33. Like, that was a booty call. She'd hit me up and say, hey, I need to see you. I'm like, all right. And that was wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. And boom, I was out. So I took this chick out, and she says, hey, just to let you know, I'm going to have a friend come along. Just to like, if you don't mind. I said, yeah, it's fine. And I figured it might be like, because she rolled with her other girlfriend who was 19. I thought it might even be her, but it wasn't, And it turned out it was a chick who was, I think, her age, but she was every bit. Like, she might have been 16, almost 17, and a junior. And she was every bit a girl, like a teenage girl. And that's what hit home for me when I was on this date, where I was like, oh, Lord, this young girl she's a girl. And it was like someone had flipped the switch when I was sitting there with her. Like, they were all giggly and this and that. They were every bit a teenage. It was like she reverted to a teenage girl. And I was like, nah, I'm good. Like, I didn't just get up and leave or anything, but like, it settled back down into like, hey, yeah, nah, I'm cool. I think I made up some excuse of like, it's not you, it's me. And it really was me, right? But that was the only 2 times that I'd ever flirted with it, right? Everything else was, they might have been like a year younger than me or whatever. But from then on, it was 18 plus, right? And I didn't like messing around with 18-year-old women when I was like 21. I actually wanted my age and older, because I didn't like the young woman foolishness that came along with that age. I'm not saying I didn't have it as a man. I just didn't care for it, right? Let that be someone else's headache. So, what does all this have to do with Trump? From my perspective, and this is why I'm talking about it, when it was apparent to me that I was dealing with a girl and not a woman, instant turn off. No. And we didn't respect guys that kind of liked them that young. You dated, that's why I was kind of hesitant with the 17-year-old, because you were like 27 and you dated a 17-year-old. I was like, bro, what? Like, you can't get a woman your own age? What's going on there? But a 40-year-old man, I don't care how much money he has, and we had them. We had those guys that own car dealerships. Those of y'all in East Tennessee, you know what I'm talking about. Own businesses or this or that, had a little bit of money, and they chased after that young tail. Even if they were legal. We did not look up to those guys back then. They were gross. They were the pervs. We didn't have cringe back then. We just called them pervs. It was they were dirty old men. For us, it was like you had that set time, when you were in your 20s, And you can maybe extend it, but once you kind of got into 30, it was like, all right, man, you need to kind of knock this foolishness off. You know, you kind of had your fun. Go ahead and get to settling down now. You know, go ahead and find you one. And now, I'm not saying that's how it needs to be. What I am saying is those guys that liked them young, just like the reason they had that character in Dazed and Confused, played by Matthew McConaughey, you know, who's like, I love high school girls. You know, I get older and they stay the same age. That was true. There were guys like that, and they were gross. It wasn't cool, right? Not even probably in the 70s. It was just gross. So everybody trying to make excuses for Trump, no, he was a dirty old man. They call him a pedophile now, right? It's still the same thing. It was dirty. It was wrong. It was unethical. Because that's why when I walked up to that line and it hit me what I was doing, I was like, oh no. No. Those guys, that's how they are. That's what they seek out. They don't want to date women their own age. Ever. It's not a one-time thing. It's not like, oh, that's just what I did back then. No. It's what they do. And as soon as those women can't satisfy that sickness in them, they're tossed to the side. Thrown away after being abused. Don't fall for this okie doke. Don't say, oh, it was different back then. No, the hell it wasn't. I'm telling you this as somebody who was there back then. Anyway, that's all I got for you. Keep the faith, defend democracy, and I'll see you later.